This video is brought to you by SoundMoneyCampaign.com. Be part of the solution. Visit SoundMoneyCampaign.com today. Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with FinanceAndLiberty.com, and back with us today is Bix Weir from RoadToRuta.com. Bix Weir has 30 years experience in the finance industry with various Fortune 500 companies. He is the creator of the Road to Ruta theory, and his commentary is published at RoadToRuta.com. Bix has dedicated his efforts over the last 13 years to exposing the long-term manipulation of the gold and silver markets. He has worked closely with the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, helping to pull the curtain away from the cabal of international bankers that have taken control of our free market system. RoadToRuta.com deals with the manipulation side of gold, silver, and financial markets, and is not constrained by the conventional thinking of how market prices fluctuate. He has developed his website to aid in the discovery of truth behind our massively manipulated markets and to help expose those who threaten our free market system. Bix Weir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, no problem, Elijah.
All right, so Thursday, the debt limit was quote-unquote suspended, so the U.S. Treasury can keep borrowing until February 7th. So what is your perspective on this?
Well, as far as I can tell, it is a gigantic event. Not necessarily that they extended the the time frame that they can get things under control, which of course they won't. But the fact that the United States, or the people running the United States for the last 60 years, have struggled to build confidence in the U.S. dollar, and they've done it through rigging markets, through causing wars, through assassinations, destroying lives, destroying data, destroying our free market. All of it. Every single little bit of it has been to uphold the confidence in the unbacked fiat monetary system, mainly the U.S. dollar. And it took Congress 3 weeks to destroy all that. It is an amazing event. And, my take, those who have followed my work show that it was all done on purpose. It wasn't the Democrats and the Republicans jockeying for position on re-election and who controls the House and the Senate. It was all done on purpose to destroy the dollar, because we've hit that point in time where we want to destroy the dollar so we can return to a sane monetary system. So, I was really excited when it all started going down, and most people think it's just crazy Congress who can't get their act together, but I see a much larger plan behind all that.
You reported on an article from Reuters written by Representative Alan Grayson on October 9th, and Grayson was basically saying that if the U.S. canceled its debt held by the Federal Reserve, that would have basically ended the debt ceiling standoff in Congress. So why do you see that Congress did not just vote to cancel the U.S. debt held by the Fed?
Well, it's fairly obvious that they can do anything they want behind the scenes. This whole, the whole show behind the debt ceiling and getting the budget in order is just a show. It was Ron Paul that first introduced that idea of taking the $2 trillion that's on the Fed balance sheet and basically canceling that debt. And all of a sudden, we're well below our debt ceiling. But that's not the idea. The idea is to destroy the dollar, not to keep the system going. So I think that's why Congress hasn't done that. And if you're going to go down that path, the Fed can just create money and give it to Congress anyway and, solve the whole problem. The U.S. doesn't actually have to borrow the money from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve could just give them the money. They have that power to print money, but what will that do? That would undermine the whole theory of fiat money in general, which is basically a Ponzi scheme that's waiting to be destroyed. So, they're hanging on a little longer. I see serious repercussions around the world already with China saying, let's de-Americanize the world. And then one of their rating agencies downgrading the U.S. and Fitch put the U.S. on credit watch. It's all happening. It's going kind of slow for my liking, but it's all happening. The destruction of the perception of the dollar is happening, and it's the best thing for everybody except those who are in control now, the bankers and those who control those guys.
And speaking of that, I was actually just going to mention China saying that we should have a de-Americanized world. China's official state-run news agency, Xinhua, said Sunday that, quote, "It is perhaps a good time for the befuddled world to start considering building a de-Americanized world." And they are even proposing the creation of a new international reserve currency to replace the US dollar. So can you expand on how you see this affecting the US?
Well, for China to want to create a new currency backed by nothing, it solves no problems. They'll just be the ones, inflating it to the moon, which they already are, of course. They just aren't in the spotlight like the U.S. is, because the U.S. is supposed to be in control of the world's reserve currency, and they're supposed to take care of it, which we are not doing now. So, can there be another non-U.S. unbacked fiat currency? No, it won't last a half a second in the markets, because the U.S. in the end still controls all the market rigging programs. So they could put the U.S. dollar at zero or at 10 billion in a blink of an eye. So I don't see that going away until the U.S. decides to end that. So there's no country in the world that can stand up against the market riggers. If the United States doesn't want China to start some kind of new currency, they'll destroy it in a blink of an eye. They have the power to do that with the computer rigging programs. So I don't see that happening. But I do see China working with some of the good guys in the U.S. who are trying to take down that system. Now, China knows everything you want to know about gold and a gold-backed system, being that Wen Jiabao, the premier, he used to be in charge of their gold mines. He was in charge of mining, especially gold mines in China. His wife is one of the largest gold experts in China. China knows everything that we know about the need for a sound monetary system using gold as the primary backing. So, it's a game that's being played before our very eyes, and the key is to look behind the curtain and see what's really going on.
You mentioned earlier that Fitch Ratings actually warned that they may downgrade U.S. credit rating, and also that China's credit rating agency, Degong, has already downgraded the U.S. credit rating from A to A-. Degong's press release yesterday stated that, quote, "For a long time, the U.S. government maintains its solvency by repaying its old debts through raising new debts, which constantly aggravates the vulnerability of the federal government's solvency. Hence, the government is still approaching the verge of default crisis, a situation that cannot be sustainably alleviated in the foreseeable future," end quote. So in my opinion, it seems like the Chinese rating agency is actually brave enough to tell it how it is and actually downgrade the U.S. credit rating. But a lot of people that I've interviewed have said that the credit rating agencies in the U.S. are just not ready and not brave enough to downgrade the U.S. credit rating. But if the United States wants to destroy the dollar, as you say, isn't having the credit rating downgraded part of the plan?
Well, they will. The rating agencies are just, completely meaningless in the larger scheme of things. These are a handful of people who analyze countries based on fiat money and how much dollars they can print versus the GDP and things like that. And they're if they are told not to downgrade the U.S., they won't downgrade the U.S. We've gone to wars. We've fought. We've assassinated leaders of other countries just to control the value of the dollar. So you're not going to see the boards of these rating agencies doing anything against the power of those in charge. Now, on the other hand, there is a move to remove these guys, remove the banking powers of the world, and return to a more normal form of monetary system. That's kind of where these downgrades are coming from, and how they get the guts to do it is they were told, we'll protect you, or we want you to do this now. They were told to do it because the United States is trying to go back to a sound monetary system, a gold-backed system. And the only way to do that is to take out the banksters by destroying the electronic and paper money that's out there right now.
I wanted to dig deeper into the U.S. possibly going back onto a gold-backed system. You have researched about this extensively, and on your website, roadtoruta.com, you cited a 1982 U.S. Treasury report to the Congress of the Commission on the Role of Gold in the Domestic and International Monetary Systems. On page 21 of the report, it states, quote, "The majority of us this time favor essentially no change in the present role of gold. Yet we are not prepared to rule out that an enlarged role for gold may emerge at some future date. If reasonable price stability and confidence in our currency are not restored in the years ahead, we believe that those who advocate an immediate return to gold will grow in numbers and political influence." End quote. I'll include a link to the report in the description of this interview if our viewers want to check it out for themselves. The quote, as I said, can be found on page 21, which is page 28 of the PDF version. But can you expand a bit on how you see the U.S. returning to some sort of gold currency?
Well, it's an amazing report. If you read the full Gold Commission report, and there was a minority report that was secretly written up by Ron Paul and another guy, and not told to the rest of the bad guys on the commission, and they were released at the same time. Of course, Ron Paul advocating going back to a gold standard immediately, but the conclusion was, hey, we're not going to do anything. But if we can't get these budgets under control, then we think we might be going back to a gold standard. Well, what have they done since 1982? Starting with Star Wars and all the programs and the money printing, and you look at the trillions and trillions of dollars in debt that have been printed, and the derivatives added on, and it's just completely out of control. So what they said in this Gold Commission report is coming true now. It's been going on ever since the report was released. They said we need to get things under control. Every time you hear a congressman say we have to get our budgets under control, that's never been. They've been saying that since day one. That's never been the motivator. The motivator has been to run this system as long as possible, sucking up all the benefits of free money. Build your roads and infrastructure, build houses, and build up your military until one day people don't take this money anymore. Then you crash the system and walk away. That's exactly where we are right now. We are fulfilling the prophecy written in 1982 by the Gold Commission that one day those who advocate going back to a gold standard will say, hey, the debt's too far out of control. We need to end this, wipe clean all the debt, and go back onto a more sound and stable monetary system at least backed in some part by gold.
If I heard you right, you mentioned earlier that China is trying to take down the system and get us back on a gold standard. Why do you see that China is helping us in this way?
Well, I think they have been since the early 70s and 80s. We decided to help China out with this program of printing free money and give them time to build their infrastructure and their manufacturing. We brought our companies in there and built factories and power plants and things like that. Yes, China now owns most of the manufacturing of the world. They also own, a big chunk of the U.S. debt. But if we crash the system, China won't be too pissed off. One, they have all this manufacturing that have been built over the years, and they have all these factories. If we destroy the dollar, they'll obviously won't trade with us anymore, but they won't allow foreign ownership of companies either. They'll just take over those factories in exchange for the destroyed dollar and call it a wash. I think that was always part of the plan. And if you look at China, they don't need us. They make our goods and sell them to us for these fiat blips we call the U.S. dollar. They have 1.3 billion people. They have plenty of customers to take care of themselves. And if you look at what China's actually physically doing, they're doing exactly what they should be doing. They're building these huge cities with nobody in them. But it's all about spending money, building up infrastructure, building up places to live for their people. For when the crash happens, they're going to have these huge cities that people can move into. All debt will be erased, so everybody would have some money to spend, and we can kind of restart the economy. That's what's going on in China, and they're 100% in the know of what Alan Greenspan talked about in the early 70s of going back to a gold standard by destroying the US dollar.
I wanted to turn our focus back to the debt limit suspension and China's credit rating agency, Degong, downgrading the U.S. credit rating. It seems like these events at least seem to affect the gold price. On Thursday, gold actually spiked over $30 in just 5 minutes. Why do you see that gold spiked so much? Do you see it is because of the debt limit and the downgrade, or and where do you see precious metals going from here?
No. The gold. The reason for the gold spike was the people who control the gold price put it there. It's not a cause and effect type of thing. The price of gold and silver have been rigged via computer ever since the early 70s. There is no free market. There is no, if then. If there's trouble in Washington, then the gold price will go up. It's not why it goes up. It goes up because they set the computers to make the price go up. Now, who controls those programs at the moment? Is it the bankers, or is it people within Treasury and the Federal Reserve who are trying to end this game? I think it's both. And I think there are competing programs going after each other on this. Ultimately, the Fed and the U.S. Treasury, working for the good of the United States, which I believe they are now, will destroy the system, probably using silver to go to the moon to take out folks like J.P. Morgan and HSBC and Citi and all those people who are in on the daily rig of the gold and silver price. But the spike in gold was not due to any kind of relief from anything that went on. It was all done basically via computer programs. You hit one button, you can set the price to price of silver to $30 or $0 with a blink of a little click of a mouse on a computer. So both the exchanges that set the price, the COMEX and the LBMA. The COMEX is completely futures and options. It's got nothing to do with physical gold or silver, and the LBMA is the same. You can tell by the volumes. The LBMA trades over 100 billion ounces of silver every day, supposedly, of physical silver. That's ridiculous. Those numbers are a complete lie. And the COMEX is up at 100 billion also in futures and options. So those two exchanges are meant to confuse the reality of what the real supply and demand of physical gold and physical silver is.
Speaking of that, you reported on Wednesday's press release from the U.S. Commodity and Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, charging J.P. Morgan for massive market manipulation in the London whale trade. The CFTC stated that, quote, by selling a staggering volume of certain credit default swaps in a concentrated period, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank acted through its traders, recklessly disregarding the fundamental precepts on which market participants rely, that prices are established based on legitimate forces of supply and demand, end quote. And you've stated that this basically, doesn't this sound familiar? I mean, dumping massive amounts of paper contracts on a market to depress the price. You said that JP Morgan has done this exact thing for about 5 years in this silver market. But the CFTC has not charged JP Morgan for the silver market manipulation at all, have they?
No, but it was a very interesting it was an interesting press release, because it's basically saying that they settled with JP Morgan, but JP Morgan, that they're not saying they didn't admit guilt. They admitted guilt of massively manipulating the market, and the CFTC said it just in that announcement. Now, you can go to any market, almost every market, and JP Morgan is the big gorilla in there, and they do the exact same thing. I've outlined that for years in silver, but also in gold and natural gas. You name it, they're in there rigging the market on a daily basis. And they're under investigation probably in every single market they play in for the same thing, and they're settling a lot of them, but some of them aren't settling. And if the CFTC had used the same charges against JP Morgan about the silver market, it would have destroyed the US dollar because of the monetary qualities of silver and gold, because they do it in gold as well. Now, does the CFTC want to be the one to blame for everybody losing everything in their checking, 401k, savings, all that? by accusing J.P. Morgan or showing that J.P. Morgan rigs the silver market. No, it would place the blame on the CFTC and not where it should be on the bankers and J.P. Morgan.
Well, Bix, I really appreciate the time that you've given us today. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewers?
I think the groundwork has been laid for taking down the bankers. The shakeup in the confidence of the U.S. dollar, all the regulatory headlines from J.P. Morgan, them being they're not the only rigger, and that hot potato gets bounced around when people get in trouble. They'll try to pass it to HSBC or BlackRock or some other entity, but there really is a great foundation right now for taking down the whole bankster system. In that the CFTC is back to work, so they can see crimes as they happen, and J.P. Morgan has really been put on a pedestal as the chief market rigger bad guy right now with all the visible lawsuits. And we're at the height of the stock market. They've rigged the price of the stock market so high that even people on TV are calling for a crash. And they aren't aware of just how bad it can get at J.P. Morgan, who has 50 trillion in interest rate derivatives with this shaky interest rate market. 50 trillion would destroy J.P. Morgan, which would destroy everybody else. So we're at that point where everything comes crumbling down. We just don't know what day it'll start.
I mean, right, you mentioned in one of your recent emails that basically, with all these major banks, we only need a couple of these major banks to fail for the whole system to go down. And, they're so leveraged that if they just lose 5% of their tier one capital, they're gone.
Yeah. I mean, the tier one capital is what they can leverage off of. So if they have, $1 million of tier one capital, they can lend out 20 million. So if they lose that million, they can't lend out any of that 20 million. They got to start selling assets. That's kind of how it all starts crumbling down. And J.P. Morgan, being the largest of all banks right now and the largest derivative holder and the largest market rigger, I think they're a prime candidate for the good guys who are trying to take back our system to go after J.P. Morgan, have them, post some big losses and just watch the crumbling happen. And literally, it won't take long. It'll take maybe a matter of weeks before every 401k, every ATM shuts down, and we're scratching our heads saying, what do we do now?
And our new viewers we've talked a little bit about this before, and but for our new viewers, they might be thinking, wait a second, my 401k is going to be gone and all this other stuff. So in your opinion, if that's going to happen, what are some ways that people can protect themselves? I mean, I know we've discussed, gold and silver, but are there any other ways?
Well, you got to put yourself in that position where, the system shuts down, the monetary system, which would shut down every other system, I mean, pretty much society would shut down. And then it's kind of, how do you restart? How do you reallocate money to the people of your country? And what would happen? I wrote sent something out today about what would happen to stocks that people have in their 401k and all that. There's one, if nobody has any money because the banks went down, the company that you invested in will have no money either. So they'll have their physical assets, but with everybody trying to sell assets to gain some tier one capital, it's a massive deflating effect. But the bigger thing is that, with all this high frequency trading that goes on, millions and millions of shares in milliseconds, there's no clear transfer of title of any stocks anymore. Nobody knows who owns what. It's got to continually be going. And once the music stops, everybody will have their little, their account statement that says they own shares of GE or Apple stock, but everybody owns those shares. They've been rehypothecated so many times, and there's failures to deliver on the stock markets. That's where the shares are actually never bought. They're just transferred back and forth and back and forth, and there is no transfer of title going on anymore. And the DTCC that's supposed to keep track of all this has completely lost all their marbles. They left their vault open when Hurricane Sandy came in and it was flooded underwater for 3 weeks. so much corruption's going on behind the scenes in the stock market. Get your money out of any kind of paper or electronic wealth, and get ready for the complete wash of everything once one of these banks goes down.
Well, Bix Weir, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it with that, but people can find you at roadtoruda.com. Did you want to share with our viewers how they can sign up for your free email subscription or the paid subscription if they'd like to?
Sure. Yeah, just go to the site. The top section is all the free articles I have. There's hundreds of them. And there's a little sign up form on the left side. You can put your name and email in, and you'll get emails. I usually send 2 or 3 out a week, depending on what's going on. And then if you want to get deeper into depth, there's a paid subscriber section, and you get a free Road to Ruta coin with it, which is pretty cool, and everybody seems to like those. So yeah, come on by and check it out.
Great. Bix, thank you so much for your time today.
No problem.
Go to financeandliberty.com and subscribe for free for more interviews and financial insight.